So hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. We're really excited to be able to offer this workshop, which should help you to figure out how to use our new title, Shakespeare's Guide to Hope, Life, and Learning in your classrooms. It really is a wonderful book, and we're so fortunate to have all three authors here to lead the workshop, Lisa Dickson, Shannon Murray, and Jessica Riddell. A couple housekeeping things. We have a handout for everyone. This is going to become available in the chat. This is just a short version of the full resource, and we'll email out a longer version after the workshop. We will also have a discount code for the book available in the chat. This is in case you haven't yet managed to acquire your own copy. So you can just put this discount code in our website to get a percentage off the list price. We will have a Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions throughout or at the end, you're welcome to just pop them in the chat. And before we start, I'd like to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto Press operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. With that said, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Lisa Dickson, Shannon Murray, and Jessica Riddell. All three authors are 3M National Teaching Fellows, which is the highest recognition in Canada for educational leadership. Lisa Dickson is a professor of early modern literature and literary theory at the University of Northern British Columbia, where she specializes in Renaissance literature, especially Shakespeare and tragic drama, literary theory, and teaching and learning in higher education. In her research, service, and teaching, she explores the concepts of critical hope and empathy, and seeks to build learning environments both within her own classrooms and in higher education as a whole that awaken students to their own agency as learners. Shannon Murray is a professor at the University of Prince Edward Island, where she teaches early modern and children's literature. She is the recipient of the AAU Award for Faculty Development and the Lifetime Achievement Award for the Society for Teaching and Learning in Higher Education. And her children's book, Bounce and Beans and Burn, was nominated for the Island Book Award. The founding editor of The Recorder, she has published on John Bunyan's Book for Boys and Girls on adaptations for children, as well as on the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. Finally, last but not least, Dr. Jessica Riddell is a professor of early modern literature in the English department at Bishop's University, specializing in early modern dramatic and non-dramatic literature. In her capacity as chair of undergraduate teaching excellence at Bishop's, she explores innovative teaching and learning practices, creates mentorship opportunities for students and faculty, and participates in a wide range of consultations at the national and international levels. Thank you so much for being here with us today, and without further ado, I will hand it off.
Thanks, Michaela, for that wonderful introduction. And I get to go first and just talk a little bit about the genesis of this book before passing it on to my dear colleague, Shannon Murray. So the three of us got together a number of years ago and decided to start having conversations about the things that we love the most, about Shakespeare, about teaching, about higher education. And what we found was that there is a Shakespeare for everything, that there was a Shakespeare play or moment or speech that illuminated our own context, that took us through a world that is complex, often fraught, and troublesome. So we started to have these conversations, and we sat down and decided to adopt 4 plays to write about individually, but then also to write in the margins together. So we took on the feat of King Lear, As You Like It, Henry V, and Hamlet as our 4 texts that we really wanted to think through in some complexity ourselves and then together. And that is what created this book, which was many, many years of thinking and talking and conversations, of writing in the margins and the edges of our days at conferences and before and after courses that we co-taught. And we're just so excited to be able to share it with you today and to talk about what we love about it and maybe provide some possibilities for how you might use it in your own teaching, in your classroom, and in life more generally. So Shannon Murray, would you like to take it it on?
Absolutely. Yeah, so as Jessica pointed out, we came together in a rather interesting way, and really early on, we came up with almost a motto for what we hope to do. And it's kind of borrowed and altered from the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design's motto, which is, we will do no more boring art. We decided we would go with, we will do no more boring scholarship. And I think what we meant by that is that we wanted our experience of scholarship to match the deep delight that we had already found in our teaching lives. And so it's fair to say that the way the three of us taught really informed how we collaborated. We wanted our scholarship to mirror that liveliness and rich conversation that we found in our classrooms. But then our collaboration and our experience of intellectual friendship actually transformed how each of us teaches now. So all three of us already saw conversation as a central metaphor for what happens in our classrooms. And it also functioned for us as a perfect analogy for the collaborative and always changing experience of theater and of Shakespeare's plays in particular. Because meaning in those plays doesn't come from one voice on the stage, as you all know. No one character tells us what to think or how to feel. Meaning is created anew each time the play is performed through the thoughts and the work and the play of everyone and everything involved, from the actors and directors, the creatives, the audience, of course, even the space itself and the historical and cultural moment. So shift one note in any performance or any reading, and the rest of the thing also shifts. It'll never be the same twice. And that's what excites us about Shakespeare and about the classroom, because when it's a true collaboration, a real conversation, it's never dull and it's never the same. So I really do love our two central ideas that you'll find in this book, the idea of critical hope and of critical empathy. And conversations about both are really rewarding to take into a classroom. I encourage my students to think of them as alternatives almost to Aristotle's pity and fear. So what if instead of pity and fear in the audience, we thought of engendering hope and empathy? What would that feel like? How does Shakespeare create situations that allow those two to blossom? But for me, even more than those two ideas, which I think we all thought would be the most important things for us in the book, what I love most in what we did, and I'm so grateful to our editors for allowing us to do it, is the ways that we were modeling intellectual friendship and conversation through the object of the book itself. We haven't tried to homogenize our voices, and we have very different voices. But in our marginal conversations, which you'll see sort of at the edges of our chapters, we question and we support, we add to and we jump off of the ideas that we're reading in each other's chapters. We even change our minds. And rather than erasing that process, we left it in. And even more than that, we sometimes try to draw attention to it. So I hope what we've done is to model the tentativeness and openness that leaves space for continuing creation of meaning and new readings. And we wanted to show that we're never done with Lear. I'm never done with Hamlet, right? So why would we suggest that we are in our scholarship? I really love Emma Smith's work, where she identifies gappiness as one of the most significant and characteristic aspects of Shakespeare's plays. She writes that the gaps in the plays open up a space to think differently about the world and experience it from a different point of view. They are, she says, fundamentally incomplete and unstable. They need us to make sense. And I love that idea. Shakespeare needs us, right? Shakespeare's plays need us to make sense. So what we've tried to do in the book is to create that openness, those gaps and spaces that we can bring into our classrooms as well, to allow deep and important conversations and intellectual friendships to thrive, whether our students are talking about Shakespeare or not. So these are some of our principles: empathy, hope, but also that openness, that gappiness in scholarship. And now Jessica and Lisa are going to give you a couple of specific examples of how they've taken those into their classrooms this term. Lisa first.
Yes, thank you, Shannon. Okay, so as Shannon's pointed out to us, the book as a whole is really interested in how we move from those more abstract values to actual on-the-ground practice. So for myself, I wondered what something like critical empathy might actually look like in the classroom, and what kinds of practices would it create, and how we would actually create it in that space. So the outcome of that rumination is the chapter on Henry V, for example. So I'm going to be sort of talking around that idea. So Shakespeare himself gives us a method of inquiry that's inclusive and sensitive to the to complexity in the way that those kinds of core values of critical hope and critical empathy require. So basically, he likes to take a problem and put it on the stage for us and then turn it over and show it to us from this side and that side and the other side, so that we can look at it from a variety of perspectives. So we can actually see this method on stage, for example, in Henry V in the Siege of Harfleur, where we come away with the idea that what you understand about a situation is really dependent upon where you stand yourself, either figuratively or actually physically in the space. So, for example, the war in France, which is sort of the core of Henry V, looks really different from the 10,000-foot view of the chorus than it does from the blood and mud perspective of the foot soldiers. And we get the entire gamut of those perspectives, from the very lofty to the low in that scene. So that kind of prompted me to ask what that would look like in a classroom. So how could I take that method of inquiry into the space itself? And I hit on the World Cafe model. And in the larger handout that you're going to get, I give you the detailed step-by-step instructions of how that would work. But the World Cafe in general is a method of engaging large groups in generative knowledge sharing and creation. So it allows us to cover a lot of material in a limited time, to deepen our understanding, and most importantly, to foster a collaborative community of intellectual friendship. So the chapter in the book actually derives from that experience in the classroom. So the chapter demonstrates the method where we divide the class up along the lines roughly of these various perspectives in the scenes, and the students rotate through them all, continually building on the work done by previous students and exploring the ways that these various perspectives challenge and speak to each other. And finally, we synthesize the whole thing in a large conversation where we draw connections between them and come up with a so what, a kind of thesis about our reading of that particular act in the play. So the exercise actually emulates Shakespeare's own method of inquiry and demonstrates for learners the value of breaking open to diverse perspectives and asking them to navigate this diversity in a spirit of collaboration rather than the more usual sense of competition in the classroom. So in this way, learners see each other as active creators of knowledge rather than passive recipients of it. And the learning community just expands and expands, right? Beyond just the teacher and the individual student to all of the students in the classroom. And because this chapter derives from the experience of the classroom, to students in other classrooms that are far removed in time and space, all the way back to Shakespeare and up to the present moment, that includes students in that scholarly conversations. And in our course debrief, the students unanimously identified this method as valuable and empowering, and that the learning community that it supported encouraged way deeper and richer engagement with the play and with their own learning. So in short, you can use the chapters in the books as, critical readings of the various plays, but also as a method of inquiry in the classroom that can be diverse, applied to all kinds of diverse learning situations and even across disciplines, and as an invitation into this model of inclusive intellectual friendship and critical empathy. But you might be wondering, okay, that's how we might capture something like that in the classroom. So how might we, capture something like intellectual friendship in an assignment, for example? Or how do we assess learning community? And that is where Jessica's going to take us right now. Over to you.
Thank you so much. That was a perfect segue into the assignment that I've tried out in real time this semester for the first time, coming from a number of years where I was increasingly dissatisfied with the final essay. That final essay with those 5 paragraphs, really formulaic, responding to one particular question. If it's a research essay, then students go and find authority and experts and quote them as evidence. And I thought, there's a different way to do this. And I tried a bunch of different ways for them to sort of read each other's work in advance and give feedback. But I really hadn't figured out a kind of model where we could encourage that kind of intellectual friendship, to really exercise our critical hope muscles, our critical empathy muscles, and then that third in the unholy trinity of critical love. Bell Hooks talks about it a lot in that professional love. You have to love your students, and students are creating community built on love and trust in order to transform and to break open. And so this semester, and I'm so excited, there are 2 students from my class who are in this meeting, and so maybe they can chime in the Q&A. Hi Sonoma, hi Dima. But I assigned the whole book in my class, and I actually reframed the class so that we took 4 plays. So we read the plays, and each of the 2 weeks, we also read the chapters from the book. So we were listening and engaging in the voices of the Weird Sisters. We call ourselves the Weird Sisters, the 3 witches from Macbeth, the sort of fates, these women sort of operating on the margins, on the edges, very, very witchy, very weird, no sort of centralized power or authority or status, but deep embodiment of language. And so what I framed the class is we're now in a community of weirdos. We have found our weirdos, and we're in conversation with my 2 weirdos in the book, but also together in a community, in a classroom. And so the final assignment is to write one chapter on one of the plays, so that we would create as a community Shakespeare's Guide to Hope, Life, and Learning 2.0, the student edition. And so we scaffolded it. So we had, April 3rd, we spent a creative atelier together. You came with your first draft of your chapter. You wrote about what Shakespeare means to you, how it matters, how it resonates, one of the threads that had been percolating over the course of the semester. And then workshop it. I put everybody into covens of 3 weirdos each. They're a little Teams chat group. And then they shared their essays together, and they have to submit their final chapter with 2 other voices in the margins. So they use track changes, they use either a Google shared doc or a team shared doc, and they're participating in the kind of meaning making in conversation together that really is trying to encourage them to do that dialogue, to find a place where Shakespeare speaks to them, but also they can speak in communion with one another. So it has been a lot of support, because I've asked students to think differently about that final assignment, and they have been remarkable. And in fact, even during this session right now, I see the Teams chat, the covens are really active. They're chatting, they're talking about citations, they're talking about yes, and they're talking about how they start their chapters by pulling an excerpt from one of our chapters or our introduction and doing a yes, and. They're talking about iterative rabbit holes. They're talking about Shannon's wonder and dust in Hamlet. And so I have seen them over the last 2.5 weeks really chat very actively, and at all hours of the night, my phone sort of pops up, and as I get to peek into the magic making of these covens and the weirdos building things together. So it has been an absolute experiment, as most of my classrooms are, but it has been joyful, and it's certainly something that I will get feedback from and refine going forward. But that's just one of those examples of how to use the book, and how to use the book to mobilize, to create a kind of alchemy or a kind of magic in classrooms around critical love and community. So that's, but I think we've got 10 minutes, and we intentionally wanted to leave 10 minutes for people to ask questions, to have an invitation of gappiness, to breathe into the book in ways that we might not have imagined or designed for, but that people can use it in ways that that make sense for them, and that resonate in the classrooms and communities that they want to build. So I think I'm going to stop talking and open this up to questions and to the community, because we'd really love to hear from you.
Thank you so much for that. That was absolutely wonderful. If you have any questions, you can pop them in the Q&A. If you'd rather ask them verbally, just let me know in the Q&A as well. But please note that we are recording. All right, are there any questions? Okay, to get us started off, I actually have a question, I guess mostly for Lisa and Jessica, although Shannon, if you've talked with any students, I'd be interested in it as well. I'm wondering if you could tell me more about the student response. Lisa, you mentioned you had a course debrief, and I suppose you said Sonoma and Dima were both former students. If you wanted to pop in the Q&A and let me know what you thought of the book, that would be great, not to put you on the spot. But yeah, what are students saying about it? How are they reacting to this? This seems like such a more vibrant way to engage with Shakespeare than maybe they encountered in high school.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I do a really extensive debrief on the course at the end of the semester. We spend 2 classes, once sort of debriefing the content of the course, and then one, I give them a very large questionnaire and we go through it and talk about all the aspects of the course. And uniformly, people really, really valued, it was at 8:30 on Monday morning, that course. I had almost 100% participation. Now, this is partly because that particular community was amazing, a group of people. But they are craving being together, I think is really, really important to that. And our kind of watchword for the course was, this is a unique moment. We're never all going to be together like this ever again. And they really, really love that idea. And so this idea of a learning community that was based on intellectual friendship, hope, empathy, love, right? Students told me, I never speak in class, and this class I love to come to and see what my other students were, what my fellow learners were doing. And because it was welcoming, because it was about creating something together in conversation. So they never felt like they were in competition with each other. They were always supporting each other. And that was like so heartwarming. I admit I got a little weepy. I'm not going to lie. Yeah.
And maybe just to answer that and piggyback on that, what I loved about students reading the book alongside the plays over the course of a 12-week semester was they started to talk about Dr. Dickson and Dr. Murray as humans, as part of their class. Right? They became these animating figures. When Dr. Murray said this about Shannon, which said this about Hamlet, or when Dr. Dickson talked about the moving pieces and As You Like It in that final scene as people sort of pair off, and yet they really were in conversation in ways that I haven't seen before, even though I've assigned, the different kinds of critical essays in the past to model that kind of, scholarly research and scholarly voice. There was something of an invitation. The second thing that I didn't expect was that I brought some of the work of the book into another class that I was teaching this semester. So I was teaching a course on the metaphors of mentorship in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So totally different, 120 students, nothing to do with Shakespeare, and yet everything to do with Shakespeare. And what we did was we talked about origin stories. How did we get here? Which is exactly what Shannon and Lisa and I start with in the introduction. How did we get here? How did we get to Shakespeare? What is our origin story? And so it opened up really different ways of talking about text, but also the identity work of learners. So those were 2 unexpected benefits.
That's wonderful to hear. And what a great way to get them to engaged with secondary literature and critical thought. Anna just popped a question in the chat. She says, Jessica, the exercise you outlined sounds fantastic. Having tried it this semester, is there anything you would alter next time?
I think, thank you, Anna. It was such a wonderful experience. I would have put them into covens earlier. So I put them into covens in the final sort of 3 weeks as they were developing their essays. But I might have done the little cells of 3 weirdos at the beginning, because there is a kind of vulnerability in sharing a rough draft. There is a vulnerability of sharing essays, especially in the humanities, where you write it, you send it to your one reader who's your professor, you get a mark, and that's sometimes it. This is a lot more vulnerable, and it's a lot more modeling a kind of messiness. So I would have done the covens earlier.
Thank you for that. I have another question. Maybe I'll direct this one to Shannon, if you feel like it, or Lisa or
Sure.
Jessica. If instructors are teaching plays other than the 4 featured in the books, are there ways that they can incorporate lessons from the book into their courses?
Absolutely.
And Jessica, you
sorry,
just
go
sort of
ahead.
touched on this, but yes, thank you.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And we keep going back and forth about whether our next book is going to be 4 more plays that we do the same things to, or whether we're going to try something else. Because, yeah, what our experience showed us, I think, is that this kind of approach to Shakespeare can keep going, right? You can do this we did it with Lear and Hamlet and the tragedies. Of course, you could do that with Romeo and Juliet and Othello and Macbeth as well. So yeah, and I think what you're seeing there is in terms of Jessica's, the sun's just come out here. Sorry, that's lovely, but it's getting in my eyes. In terms of Jessica's assignment, just having the students write their own things and then respond to each other in that really communal way, and encouraging that idea of collaboration rather than competition that Lisa was saying. So absolutely, I think these are the ones we chose. We negotiated the choices. I think it's fair to say at the beginning which ones we would choose, but we could as easily have done similar work with 4 completely different plays, and we might do that yet.
That's great to hear. I'd love to see it. I'm just going to read this out from the chat because this is fantastic. So Sonoma, who is one of Jessica's students, I take it, has responded, I absolutely love this book. It has been a great tool for stepping and peering into different Shakespeare plays. It gave us an example of how far we can push ourselves and explore. I love how the opening chapter encouraged us to fall into rabbit holes, which was the perfect framework for our class. The book beautifully balanced joy, mastery, learning, and friendship. And that's absolutely lovely to hear. So thank you so much for that, Sonoma. All right, are there any questions from anyone else in the room? I don't want to dominate it as much as I have been. No? Okay. I can keep going. I've got a lot of questions. Well, we've sort of been touching on this, but can you talk to me more about the positive experiences you've had teaching Shakespeare this way? Any specific instances in your classroom that have been really moving for you?
Oh, so many. Well, I think for me, and again, I had a beautiful, gorgeous, wonderful semester with the students, but I always know that everything is going really well in the classroom when I can leave and they go on without me, or I have to we put on performances of scenes as well as a way of thinking about and analyzing the scenes, and I would show up and they'd already be there talking to each other and practicing, and just the experience of coming into the room and hearing all of that chatter. The classrooms start out at the beginning of the semester very quiet. And as that semester went on and as that community built, the students got braver and braver and more, like, it's already incredibly courageous to be a student, right? Because your whole worldview is at risk. You're coming into a space, you're going to be changed. And so to have that community, and we know from reading the literature and teaching and learning that the one thing students really need to succeed is a sense of community. So, building in that space and time for students to understand each other, to create empathy between each other, really pays off, because we covered way more and had way deeper conversations than we would have if they were just sitting and waiting for somebody, as Ira Shore says, to do education to them, So that was just the the noise and the din that came out of that space. And, you know, people who were waiting for other classrooms came, you know, would come in and say, what is this class? Like, it sounds so interesting. Everybody's always up and doing something. And it's like, well, you're invited. You can come anytime. So that was wonderful. I really liked that.
That's so wonderful to hear. All right, I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap it up, but that was a fantastic workshop. Thank you so much for that, all three of you. To everyone who's attended, thank you for attending. We're going to be sending out a link to the YouTube video of the workshop as well as the longer version of the handout. The short version of the handout is available in the chat as well as the discount code. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.